there's multiple facets of this, right? You begin to dehumanize people via the Expendables and the multiples. You begin to undervalue the impacts of death and dying because now there are multiple of you. So death is not truly the end. When we begin to no longer fear death, or we begin to question really what, like the people in the movie do. They ask Mickey all the time, "What is it like to die?" Whereas in
Mhm.
a world where you don't have Expendables, that's not a question you would find trivial at all.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of A Lost Plot, the podcast by storytellers for storytellers so that we can tell better stories ourselves. As always, I'm your host, Maverick, and today we have back with us our co-host, Andrew, to review the latest released in the cinemas, Mickey 17. This is a 2025 science fiction dark comedy film. It was based on a 2022 novel, Mickey 7, by Edward Ashton. However, it was revised and for the big screen and written and directed by Bong Joon-ho, who is the creator of what was also reviewed on this podcast back in the early days, Parasite. So, if you guys are curious at all about our thoughts on his previous work, go ahead and check that out. That was quite a fascinating discussion. Excellent foreign film. Him now coming to the American stage to bring us a film was also an interesting take, and that's what we're discussing today. So, I'm going to start off this time with my overall thoughts. Mickey 17 is unusual for us to review on this podcast. We don't generally do comedies. The aspect of this was one that we watched this because we wanted to watch it, right? It's comedies are a totally different field compared to the normal films that we do, which are actions, thrillers, whatnot, all of that kind of stuff. And watching this one, there was a lot to be said about the themes and the values and the messages that they were trying to convey. Some of them very interesting. Some of them I definitely had a big problem with personally. And it was a very interesting, thought-provoking film, much more than I thought it would be. So, with all that being said, we are actually throwing the 9-point system out the window today. I did take the 9 points to help myself analyze it, but I don't think that it's an accurate representation of any comedy, right? If you really want to know, I got a 6, right? But it's not meant for this type of movie. We just think this movie is worthy of a discussion. So that's why we're bringing it to you today. But regardless of my initial impressions, Andrew, what were your thoughts watching Mickey 17?
I think there are so many subliminal jabs and messages in both the political sphere and the religious sphere. Like there is just so much in this movie that we need to unpack.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's lots of jokes thrown in there as well. Um, I was watching it, just sitting there thinking, there's no way I'm going to remember all of this for this podcast.
100%. Uh-huh.
And the last time I felt that way was with Mufasa, but for a very different reason.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if this is a movie I would recommend to people. I think I will just
Mm-mm.
have that decided by the end of this podcast, to be honest.
Yeah.
But I am very interested to hear what you have to say as well. So,
Yeah, I mean, the messages and themes is probably what's going to dominate most of this discussion. So,
yeah.
we might go into some details about the characters and whatnot, but yeah, we'll see. We'll see where the conversation takes us, right? Before we get to that, though, if you're curious about what we're about to talk about, Andrew, why don't you give them a summary of what Mickey 17 is about?
Yeah, spoiler alert, major spoilers. Mickey 17 follows the story of Mickey. Mickey is a person living on the planet Earth during the year, 2050, I think it is.
2054, yeah.
2054. At this point, we've gone full Wall-E mode on planet Earth, right? Tons of garbage, tons of junk. It's not entirely habitable. People are trying to leave planet Earth. Mickey finds himself in a bad situation and doesn't want to get killed by a mob boss. So him and his friend leave. Mickey is kind of stupid, like mentally retarded in the sense that he doesn't know how to think through things properly, and he ends up accidentally signing up to be what's called an expendable, which is a person who is made to be cloned, and they are just that. They're expendable. They're meant to do things to further the human race or get a job done and then be disposed of afterwards, so they can be reprinted out immediately after, and then they can go on doing their job. The movie picks up after this long, drawn-out background with Mickey, number 17, presumed to be dead, and another version of him being printed out, that being Mickey 18. And the movie follows their journey throughout this on this spaceship, trying to navigate how they're going to both still survive this ordeal when what's referred to as multiples or multiple clones being around are banned and illegal and frowned upon.
Yep, that's pretty much the entire film. And you get that from the very start, where they introduce the character of Mickey 17 falling down into this ice pit, and his friend Timo goes, "Oh, well, you're not worth saving right now. We're just going to go print a new one of you, so have fun dying," and then leaves him to be eaten by the creatures that are inhabiting the land known as creepers. So, it was an interesting start to the film, but it right away sets the idea of what's going on, what the backstory is, everything you just explained about the Wall-E universe of everything being going to crap and everyone's trying to get out, right? So, what were your thoughts on how they opened it, about the very concept that they first introduced off the bat of this idea of cloning people and creating a world where people are free to create second versions of themselves as long as the first one died?
I think it is an interesting take on the idea of cloning. Let's just start there. Like, as far as the opener goes, I think it was fine. I think it was a bit long. And I remember sitting there in the theater with Preston when the title Mickey 17 goes, and he goes, "That was the opener."
Yeah.
Thankfully, the opener was not to scale, and we didn't have an extremely long 4-hour movie. But
Right.
that said, I think like you have instances of cloning, right? You've got Star Wars, you've got the clone army. The way that clones are handled in the Star Wars universe is very much they are just a genetic duplicate in their appearance and their build.
Mm-hmm.
They are not
Right.
duplicates in their personas, in their memories, in what makes you a person, right? And I think that's one of the questions, and I'm pretty sure we're going to talk about this a lot, is what makes you you?
Mm-hmm.
What is it that makes me Andrew and you Maverick? And they touch on this a little bit in the movie, and they talk about how any person can only have one soul, and like how the souls are split into multiple bodies.
Horcrux.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was a Harry Potter reference.
Yeah, if you didn't get that, then I don't know what you're doing with yourself. It raises a lot of questions, and what I do appreciate about this movie, right, is that it pushes these science fiction ideas, right, of cloning to their limits, and it tests them. There's a lot of tension, and they're pushing and pulling and prodding at this idea to its limit. And I think the greatest or the best science fiction movies will often do this, right? You've got Inception, like can you go into someone's mind? Interstellar. I think Tenet was an attempt at doing it, but I don't know that many of us even know what the idea he was trying to get at was. It takes a few watches.
Which we have not reviewed yet on this podcast. Might be worth giving him a little justice on that one. Before you trash it so hard, Andrew.
I enjoy Tenet. I actually really like it. You also get this with the TV show Severance, which if you guys haven't seen, you should definitely watch. And so you get these science fiction ideas that are pushed to their limit. And in this movie, it's cloning. I think they handled it well with the way that they went about it, right? Because their idea of cloning isn't just a genetic duplicate in the sense of like your makeup. It was, we're going to re-download all of your memories, which means theoretically, any clone should be an exact duplicate of you. Like it's like having a save file in a video game. You have a save, and we're just going back to that save of you.
Right.
So sure, they're not going to have that. He said what he does it every week and upload.
Yeah.
You're not going to have that week or a few days of memories up to the point where you died, but you're still going to be, for all intents and purposes, should be the same person.
Right. Which I will say is a minor thing I had with the film overall was that everyone kept asking him, what is it like to die? And he's like, oh, it sucks. I hate it every time. But he doesn't really actually know what it's like to die if he's only getting updated once a week. Like his memory up to the death, right, it wouldn't be uploaded.
Yeah.
But
Which, yeah, for him, he would never know. But okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's just it was a minor point. I wasn't like gonna get caught up in it for the sake of the film. And I
Yeah.
kind of took it more as most people were just jabbing at him, being like, "Oh, you're an expendable, blah blah blah," and it was trying to be a point of comedy. But yeah, I think that the film had an interesting premise. For starters, looking at the original work, which was called Mickey 7 by Edward Ashton, it added a little bit of a light to the context of why he even created the first book, right? Which he said himself very clearly is very different from the movie. So he knew when he
Yeah.
first wrote it that it was much longer than what we were going to see able to be adapted by Bong Joon-ho, and he was told as much when it was first being adapted. He said, "That's fine. I fully acknowledge what's going to happen is going to be very different." That being said, the initial premise that inspired Edward Ashton, according to his words in an interview, was this idea of watching Star Trek, right? And the idea that they dissolve from one area and reappear in another area. And he goes, technically, that is not the same person in that idea. You have completely disintegrated one to recreate a new form and somehow imbued that new form with the components of what makes them truly human. And so that was the first idea that started out as a short story and then turned into a novella and then turned into a full-on novel for him that he then released in 2022, I believe. So that was the inspiration that we got for the concept of this film that was then adapted and we now see on the silver screen today. Anyways, yeah, I thought it was interesting, and it is definitely a big part of the film is this idea of what does it mean to be a human, right? And who is your personhood represented by? And then you get into the ideas of fracturing it and what does it mean if they're slightly different? Are they the same person? Are they a different person, right? And all the different aspects
Yeah.
of that. And you even get, we could just go on and on about each of the concepts. The first one that I think is worth mentioning in regards to him is this idea of where it first came from, right? You have this person, this scientist who originally is amoral, if you will, in his personality and creates the ability to even create a clone of yourself and upload all of your consciousness to it. Turns out this guy wanted to commit crimes on the side because he was a insane individual and duplicated himself multiple times so that his duplicates could then go off and murder homeless people for the joy of it. So he was a psychopath. The ideas here then are representative, like who is responsible for that crime, right? Is it the person who actually committed the crime, or is it everyone who's involved? Because clearly there was a tendency of the individuals who were all there to want to commit the crime, right? And there was clearly some premeditated idea around that when he duplicated himself to begin with. Who has the soul? Who is the person who actually is imbued with like eternal value in this case, and other ideas like that? What were your thoughts on the initial premise for these characters and why even duplicating expendable people existed in this universe?
I'm not sure I understand the question because I feel like it might be a repeat, but maybe not.
It's focusing more so on like the both the moral aspect and the uh somewhat religious aspect, which we'll get into moving forward, of this idea of being an expendable and being able to be duplicate your body.
Since we're going to be talking about themes a lot, I'm going to say what I think what I think three main themes of this movie are. Right.
Okay,
First of all, I think it's very anti-religion.
right.
Secondly, I think it's a critique of capitalism. Thirdly, I think there is an allegory for Donald Trump in this movie, or I should rather say the Republican Party in general. Um, and I'll talk about those three things as we get to them.
Mm-hmm.
When we're thinking about the clones, though, specifically, you haven't really gotten to the anti-religious message when you're talking about just the creation of the clones themselves. I think the anti-capitalism or the critique of capitalism comes in pretty early on in this film, with the idea that basically in a capitalistic society we view humans as commodities, as goods. And so if we can
Right.
make the human body into an expendable item, then now we can increase the amount of goods and services that are available to the rest of humanity, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, Now, I personally think the problem becomes here then, if the human body is a commodity, then we're no longer serving humanity in the sense that capitalism is meant to. Um, because if you think about it, you're trying to better people's quality of life by making goods and services cheaper, more available, increasing the competition between certain actors. And so you do that all as a means to an end to better the quality of life of the individual. But if the individual now becomes a part of that machine, then it's a I think that it is where the movie is trying to draw its critique from. Does that make sense?
So you're saying that they're making the argument that commoditizing an individual is a bad thing, or you're
Yes.
making okay, and you're saying that that's already a natural part of the economy, is that everything is commoditized, or that it's driven to the purpose of the person. Like commodities are built for the purpose of the individual, regardless. Because you could argue, right, that like medicine is already commoditizing the health of the body, and this is just an
Yeah.
extension of that.
Well,
That you
so
have a whole
so
new body
let's
instead of just an extra arm, or you fix your toe, or something like that.
yeah. And so this movie makes a lot of the arguments against capitalism, right? So I myself am going to push back about against these and just kind of show a little bit of a contrast here, right?
Sure.
I would posit that the human body is a good, or it is something that is a commodity in the marketplace. And
Hmm.
the fact of the matter is, right, the human is the person providing the good or service. They are an essential portion of the machine that is the economy. It doesn't matter what type of economy you live in, right? It could be a communist one, it could be a socialist one, it could be fascist, it could be capitalist. It doesn't matter. The human body is still an essential portion of that because you're providing labor. What this movie does is it posits that capitalism at some point will go so far as to begin to dehumanize the individual.
Mm.
Whereas capitalism in its current form doesn't necessarily dehumanize the individual, but what the film is positing is that capitalism, if you take it to its fullest extent, will dehumanize them.
Interesting. And I see like where that interplays with, say, the two themes, or the two instigators, if you will, of what is going on. This whole program is tied to two people, or two groups in this film. One is the corporation. I think they mentioned the name of the corporation at some point. I forget what it was, but they say that the corporation is funding this space program and funding basically the expendable program where someone can be reprinted, right? The other one
Yeah,
is religion, and specifically how there was a religious organization also behind this program, doing the same thing. So
yeah,
either way you take it, if you look at it from a corporate standpoint, that is an interesting angle to address it with. I mean, my general impression is that there is some level of, for example, you can make the argument that commoditization of things like entertainment and whatnot helps us to dehumanize individuals on a daily basis anyways, right? Like the things that we consume, even consuming, for example, it's documented that people watching pornography helps them to dehumanize women when they view
yeah.
them in a natural
Well,
world, right?
yeah, people who watch porn are 22% more likely to commit acts of sexual violence.
Right. So there's like things like that already exist in the commoditization of the economy, if you will, that do seem to tend toward a dehumanizing principle. And you could argue that like capitalism and the greed for money is the incentive for getting involved in that. I mean, you see that even for people making excuses why they have OnlyFans. You'll say, "Oh, like I can make so much money on OnlyFans versus working a day job as a cashier at McDonald's or something like that." So,
Yeah.
I mean, just pushing back on that counter argument, like a lot of the things that we see in society today are affirming the idea that dehumanization is driven by a capitalist mindset.
I don't want to turn this into like a whole political, podcast.
Sure.
I think it is important to interrogate the ideas and themes that a movie presents, especially when a movie, specifically for this movie, rather, because this movie
Hmm.
is heavily focusing on the themes that it's presenting, right?
Right.
You have like we've talked about the themes presented in, say, Christopher Nolan's Batman movies, right? You've got the
Hmm.
themes of what is justice. He doesn't necessarily present you with an answer, but he presents you with different alternatives for what it could be.
Hmm.
This movie, though, clearly gives you what it thinks the answer is, right? It is very
Right.
clearly critiquing capitalism. It is very clearly anti-religious. And
Hmm.
so I think when you have a movie that is clearly presenting ideas, it's important to, one, talk about how its own arguments were presented, right? Was its own arguments presented in such a way that was compelling to the audience?
Sure.
Are the conclusions they came to valid based on the arguments they presented? And then finally, are their conclusions valid, and was their thesis valid, like the ideas they presented from the get-go?
Right.
Um, and so I think the big thing is that this movie is coming from a place that's already anti-religious, which means it's going to come to the conclusion that capitalism is a fundamentally flawed system because they are anti-religious in the undertones of this film, right? And so I think that your position on religion is going to inherently affect every other view you have on life. So when this movie comes from a place of religion is a facade and doesn't exist, and it's there as an opiate for the masses,
Hmm.
that's going to feed into their idea of how society ought to function, and by default the economy as well.
Right. And I think that there's an interesting interplay, especially at the end regarding that. So we'll get to the dynamic between the two later on in this podcast. So if you're curious, keep listening. But in regards to that corporate theme and capitalism, the anti-capitalism theme that you discussed, do you think that the themes that they developed terminated well or supported the argument they were making in this film?
See, this is the theme that I think is kind of weird almost. Like, it's not like, because you have certain themes where it's like influencing a character's their progression throughout a movie, right? We talk about.
Hmm.
I'm going to go back to What Is Justice, because I think Christopher Nolan does a really good job of outlaying a theme in a movie, right? And he explores that theme through various characters. And as the movie progresses, those themes terminate in certain actions the characters take. I think this movie doesn't do a very good job of having their themes played out through the characters in this movie, right? At least the anti-capitalist one. I think
Right,
the
right. Yeah, I could get
anti-religious
behind
one
that. Hmm.
functions differently in this movie, but also the anti-religious one is fundamental to every single other theme throughout this movie. It
Hmm.
influences all of them.
Right,
So
correct.
I think the anti-capitalist one is one that comes out early, and it's kind of the whole idea of like, oh, we've worked the Earth for all that it could give us. We've destroyed the planet. Now we need to go out and destroy other planets and be this scourge on the entire galaxy that is humanity is. And look at these pathetic people that want to go out, like the main villain. I'm forgetting his name. Kenneth
Uh,
Marshall.
yeah, Kenneth Marshall.
Um,
You're not talking about
uh,
Ylfa? You don't think she's the main villain?
um, and so you have this idea, right? But I think the problem with their anti-capitalist critique is it is simply them calling capitalism bad and then moving on. And they kind of just have the villain just be this like power hungry tyrant. I think the problem with this is he doesn't necessarily show us why capitalism is bad. He shows us why the usurpation of power is bad and being a tyrant is bad, but it's
Hmm.
not necessarily a proper critique on capitalism uniquely. Um, and I think it kind of gets lost as the movie progresses. And I think it kind of shows too, like that's not even the first thing that came to your mind when you're watching this, was it? Was the idea of
No.
the capitalism critique.
I
And
will say that
yeah,
of all of the themes, this one was definitely not one I wrote down actually. Of the three themes I got,
yeah.
or the main three themes I got, this one was not one of my main three. So, anyways, keep going though.
I will also say I'm not necessarily saying there's not other themes in this movie.
No,
I think the
I know.
anti-religious one is just a lot more all-encompassing, and there's going to be a lot more
Correct.
subsections of that.
Hmm.
And then the third one was more of a joke for me because I just thought it was hilarious. The Trump stuff. Um, I bring up the capitalism one separately because I was pretty sure you probably didn't write it down. Um, even I mean, I watched with Preston. I don't think Preston noticed it. I noticed it because I'm a debater, and that's exactly where my mind goes. And I've debated cap Ks, and so I can see a critique of an economic standpoint, or I can perceive one, or I know one when I see it. Um, I just thought it was important to bring it up because I think while this movie does have very strong themes with the anti-religious one, I think it attempts to do a lot, and with this theme in particular, it kind of gets lost in the sauce, if you will, about a third or a halfway through the movie.
Right. Well, I mean, and alongside that, maybe why it's less of an effective theme is because it's the impetus for where they're going, right? Like these are the economic factors in this universe that they've created for why we're on this mission to recolonize another planet, right? And so the ideas of it are not fully developed because we don't get to what a new economic system would look like in another planet because by the end of the film they barely started. So it's interesting, and I think that that's a fair point. It really ties more into some of the other ideas, for example, propaganda, and how propaganda, the themes around propaganda are very strong in this one as well, where
Yeah,
he has all of the entertainment surrounding the main leader of this expedition, Kenneth Marshall, who is helping to lead the ship off to colonize Nilfheim or whatever the planet's called, and everything is
Niflheim.
Niflheim, and it's everything is done in a way that shows him in a good light, shows other people in a poor light. There's even some discussion around things you can't even say or you shouldn't be discussing or all of these ideas. And so when you get this in the film, you get a strong message of how not being allowed to say things is bad, being able to have a honest discussion around things and exploring new ideas is very important, and stuff like that. Once again, I don't even think this is a big theme in it, but it kind of interplays off of the initial jump from capitalist type esque discussions into this idea of propaganda, and then of course into the religious aspect. What
Yeah.
were your thoughts on the propaganda theme, if you had any? And then, of course, probably the religious themes are worth discussing at this point.
I don't know if you want to go first while I gather my thoughts here, because I'm not gonna lie, a lot of these themes are very tightly interwoven, so it's hard to kind of pull them apart. Um,
Sure. I mean, so you're not wrong, right? And that's one of the things you see with the propaganda theme is that it's tied somewhat to religion, right? And what is the right religious response, right? And you see some level of uh, brainwashing, if you will, in a lot of religious systems today. And so I'm also generally uh, pro free speech. So, like, the idea that you should be able to explore ideas is not necessarily an opposing theme to me. I was like, of all the things that they go with in this film, I don't think that's a bad one. And that's where you have a mixture of like really interesting themes that I agree with, mixed with other interesting themes that I completely disagree with in this film. And I would generally say that there's more themes I don't like in this film than I do, but I think that at the very least, it's interesting how you can have these different ideas very strongly demonstrated in this film, and then have them interplay in a way that you can say, I like that, I don't like that, but at the same time, it makes a cohesive storyline and a cohesive film to go off of. So I think that the free speech one gets somewhat terminated in the end with the elections with Nasha and whatnot, who becomes the new senator, and I mean, we'll get to the end when we get to the end, but like, it's another one of those films. It does get completed. Is it like a big theme? Once again, no, but like worthy of mention in regards to like the religious aspect. Um, well, actually, I'll let you respond before we get to the religious stuff.
so I know we're not doing this using the 9 points, right?
No,
We're not going through it traditionally. I went through
no,
it. I think I gave it like a 6.8 using the 9 point system.
right,
Um, I think that the theme of propaganda and free speech is intricately tied to Kenneth Marshall's character. Um, so I'll probably want to talk about him a little bit with
sure,
this.
and that's fair. I mean, he's like the main. villain of
Yeah.
this film, so it's worthy of having a point made to him. And we will get back to Mickey at some point because there is a
Yeah.
very strong theme that I think is worthy of discussing around them, but them being 17 and 18. But
Yeah.
in regards to Kenneth Marshall, please go into that.
I think Kenneth Marshall's character is interesting, right? He's meant to represent this failed politician who is just power hungry. He's also an idiot. Um,
He lost 2 elections.
yes. I,
All of his supporters wear red.
it makes me it makes me wonder if they're trying to like say that the population of Earth has just become progressively more retarded over time, because even his character seems to be stupid. Um, and he's the only political leader we see. His wife's a bit crazy too. His friend Timo, a bit crazy. Um, Most of the people he interacts with are not really there. The only people that are really there are the scientists, which would make sense if they're the ones who haven't been exposed to like pollutants in the air and toxins that other
Mhm.
people are consuming. So that's not to say that that's really affecting any of my views on the themes of this film per se. I just thought it was interesting that his character seemed to be this way. Um, on top of that, though, oh, go ahead. I don't know if you're going to say something.
No, I mean, I don't think you're wrong, and I think it's more speaking to the political message they were trying to tell in this story, that they were making a parallel to an existing political leader and they
Yeah,
wanted it to appear dumb versus having it be a situation where it was an actually compelling villain. But they also trying to make this a dark comedy, right?
yeah,
So it was like the villain is supposed to be funny because they're an idiot.
yeah.
Was it actually effective? I didn't think he was that funny, but it's also like I could
I did
see how
not either.
somebody could find him funny, and so I'm not going to critique it on that regard. And that was the
Yeah,
purpose of that. But in
yeah,
regards to making an actually compelling character, not going to do it. In regards to the themes, though, he was the leader of this group that is being held up by the religious organization to be, which is like an explicitly Christian organization because they talk about religious ideas in the film. Um, he's held up as like basically the savior of these people who's leading them to the promised land of this new planet Niflheim.
yeah. Now, I will also say, just as a side note, because we're going to talk about the anti-religious themes later, I do think the capitalist critique plays into the anti-religious theme a lot, which is why I also bring it up. And the reason why is that they're trying to say that religion has become a commodity as well. That said, though, at least that's how I viewed it. With Kenneth Marshall's character, a couple of things. One,
Mm-hmm.
if I had a nickel for every time a Marvel actor played a version of Donald Trump, I'd have 2 nickels, but it's still ironic. I personally do not enjoy it when a movie is intentionally making jabs at a political actor. I would much rather you just make a documentary and call out that person, right? It's very underhanded to me. I personally don't enjoy it. That's not to say that the movie's necessarily bad, right? And the director has come out and said publicly, Donald Trump did not influence the creation of this character. Okay, maybe it was Elon Musk. I don't care. You used somebody, and it was very obviously someone who would be a more Republican leaning candidate by the policies that this guy has. Also his demeanor. I was watching this movie because me and Preston early on were just like, why? This is so Trump-esque. And then
Mm-hmm.
his hand gestures, the puckering of the lips, the
Mm-hmm.
face shape, the eyes, everything, the suit with the red tie. Like you couldn't have made Mark Ruffalo act more like Trump if he had stood on a stage and done improv of Donald Trump, okay? It was so obvious. I don't care how hard you try to deny it. There's no way that was unintentional. Even if that was just Mark Ruffalo making a jab in his own secret way. I don't care. Um, it's all there, and anyone with a brain is going to catch that if they're at all tuned into politics. Okay.
Sure.
I that said though, I think he makes a good, dumb villain who's just power hungry and obsessed with, sex and money and influence, to the point where he lets the ego get the best of him. I think the problem with that is that this movie doesn't really function as your stereotypical or your typical even m- plot for a movie. So
Hmm.
him being he more is just there as a plot device, I guess is the best way to put it. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah.
He's more just there as a way to further the theme of propaganda.
Yeah, like I was saying earlier, this is a comedy. He's very clearly leaning into the comedic side of things. So, I don't have. This is why we didn't really analyze the nine
Yeah.
points for this one, because this is very clearly meant to be a comedy more than anything else. And you see that with even how they heighten the tension, right? Technically, he was getting from bad to worse situations in this film. The problem was is that it was done in a funny way to make you laugh. And so when you're trying to heighten tension, laughing actually reduces the tension because you've released tension in the body. So to physically do that on a regular basis means you are not getting emotionally gripped at a higher and higher level by how they made this film. It was clearly intentionally a comedy, right? So
Yeah.
I'm not going to critique him on that regard. In regards to it being a film that is having a message that's being conveyed, uh, I don't necessarily have a problem with satire. I might disagree with a satirical message on any number of people, but like that happens all the time. You're gonna have people on both sides of the aisle that are like, I don't like this portrayal because clearly it's a jab at this or whatever. So I don't have a problem with it. I mean, even my understanding is that Alice in Wonderland, when it was written, was a critique of politics at that time, and it was taking jabs at actual politicians who existed in that frame of reference. So, and now it's
I
a
will say, as a side
best-selling
note,
book
it's
and
not that I
movie.
just dislike, like, oh, if you're representing a certain candidate that I may support. It's just I dislike it in general.
No, yeah,
Especially when it seems pretty obvious you're trying to impersonate a candidate and then deny it up front. Um, like this is something where I have eyes. I'm watching this. There is no way that this is an accident, and it's just like it feels really underhanded for the director to go and just say nope. That has no influence whatsoever from Trump. So
sure. Yeah, I mean, whatever. I'm not going to get caught up on it personally. I think my only critique with it is it's not nuanced. It's very obviously
yeah,
just a brick wall of a statement. So,
yes,
it's whatever. I don't think it's worth getting caught up on. What I do think is worth getting
yeah,
caught up on is one of the main themes of this film, and that is of the religious ideas they're representing. And you embodied those or discussed those pretty well to start off. This idea that basically religion has become a opiate for the masses that they now consume to be happy in their lot in life, especially as they're moving forward into space. What do they have to keep them happy? This leader who has strong religious fervor, right? And that is what keeps them in line. What were your thoughts on the messages they were trying to convey? Did they do those well? Was the premise strong? What are your thoughts?
I think they interrogate a very real problem we face even today, and that's the commodification of religion, right? You see that in mega churches all over the United
Mm-hmm.
States. Um, that is not to say that I would take the stance that all religion is simply a commodity and an opiate for the masses.
Mm-hmm.
I think what they are doing is they are it's the so I this is why I bring up the capitalism critique, right? I think based on what I saw in this movie and the way that the ideas were presented, I think the anti-religion theme was an outflowing of their capitalism critique. And I think that it started out as a capitalism critique, and the anti religion message becomes more prominent solely because if religion is an opiate for the masses, that's going to influence things much more than capitalism necessarily being a problem. Also, an anti religion message is much easier to interrogate in a movie format than I would say a capitalism critique would be, specifically in like a dark comedy as they're doing. So,
Mm-hmm.
that's not to say that the capitalism critique was done better than the religion themes. But I do think that the anti-religion theme is an outflowing of the capitalism critique itself. And so I think they take this idea of the commodification of religion, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they have this whole setup of where we're at right now. What is the world like?
Mm-hmm.
Which is meant to be a termination of where the world is at now and where we're going. It's
Right.
almost like a post-apocalyptic movie, if you will, taking the modern day and saying, what if we take this to its fullest extent? What if we continue down this road of capitalism for all in America, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so there's multiple facets of this, right? You begin to dehumanize people via the expendables and the multiples. You begin to undervalue the impacts of death and dying because now there are multiple of you. So death is not truly the end. When we begin to no longer fear death, or we begin to question really what, like the people in the movie do. They ask Mickey all the time, what is it like to die? Whereas in
Mm-hmm.
a world where you don't have expendables, that's not a question you would find trivial at all.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so you get to the religion, and you have censorship, and the propaganda is also an outflowing of this as well, right? It's the idea that we need to keep propaganda flowing so that we can keep our capitalistic society in a state of general peace and stability. The religion portion of this is the idea of how do we satiate the masses to keep them contained
Mm-hmm.
in this, like, capitalist. I say capitalistic, by the way, because I don't really think it is. I use that term lightly because I think that's what the movie is going for. This dehumanized society. And so the religion then becomes a bigger portion because now we have left Earth. We've left this main society, the where we all are, and now we're on a ship, right? And you've got your captain on deck, if you will, who is much more of a king really than a any form of, like,
Elected leader.
democratic government. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Um and so I'll let you talk about the anti-religious theme more. I just wanted to preface that with this and see what you had to say about that whole idea of the capitalism leading into that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's interesting that the capitalism theme is there. I don't know that it's as integrally tied as you say, but it's definitely both themes are very prevalent. I will definitely agree with that, right? The religious themes comes off from the very beginning where they're explaining the very existence of the expendable program. And it starts off with this idea that everyone wants the okay for this to actually occur. And they're looking to religion to affirm this. And religion, as the arbiter of this, says that life is sacred. You can't just have multiple of the same people. That's not cool. So you can only have one at a time, is basically the premise of the religious idea, right? Which is interesting, partially because while they're still exploring the idea of it, and that concept, right? You can only have one at a time. That's all that's allowed. Is still trying to protect the idea of the sanctity of life while also having this idea that you basically the premise of the film continues to exist, right? You have the film actually occur. So it's an interesting concept, and the idea of religion being the arbiter of that just shows like, oh, this is such a powerful force in the universe. Everyone just follows what the religious people say, right? I wasn't sure at first if this was taking a shot specifically at Christians or just taking a shot specifically at Mormons, because it was saying that like the religious organization funded this program in addition to the corporation. And I'm like, well, I mean, we all know the
It's
Mormons
just a
have a lot
shot
of
at the
money.
Catholic Church.
Oh, that too. Wow, putting those side to side, I'm sure that would make the Mormons very happy. Um,
They're
yeah.
basically the same thing.
Wow, that is crazy. They will. I wonder. Anyways, okay. So.
Fight me, fight me.
um, Regardless, they were basically looking at strong religious institutions as bankrolling part of this program that they're looking at today, right? And so
Yeah.
that was the impetus there, and people just follow along. So, is it interesting? Yeah, it is. And then you see the brainwashing when they're having dinner with Kenneth Marshall, and they're talking about the friend who died for Kia, who's this guard on the ship, and they start praying and singing to God, and it's very clearly just mocking the very idea of God being in control of someone's soul and who is really out there listening to such a ridiculous song being played out, and etc. etc. So,
I would have smote them if that was such foul music. I'm just gonna say that.
you're like, I wouldn't even listen to this. No. Yeah, I mean, it's very strongly anti-religious in the film.
Yeah.
It's not, and they have this message. I think what's interesting about it, which gets to the end of the film, is that even with this religious sentiment, at the end of the day, they actually agree with the general idea of the religious group, which is that you need to only have one soul out there. And they do that by blowing up the machine that ends up creating Expendables to begin with. So, as much as they're like, oh, religion is bad in this film and you shouldn't have like basically it's an opiate for the masses. The premise of the religious organization that they put forward from the start of the film is the very premise they agree with at the end of the film, that yeah, it's probably not good to have multiples of people. That's not a wise move. We need to get rid of this. And they blow it up. So, other than that, I, I mean, I'm biased because I am inherently religious individual, and so I
Hey, let's
disagree with the
go.
idea that there is simply no God out there. So, um, I disagreed with the message they were trying to convey, but that was how it played out. I also just don't think it was very. It wasn't similar to the propaganda idea, which was very clear, or the Trump idea, right? Which were very clearly like just in your face. This is what we're trying to say. This was one of those messages that was in your face. This is what we're trying to say. And rather than being nuanced and fully developing it, it was more so one of this is how you should think about things, and this is how we think about things. And I just don't think it was a very strong critique of, well, when you have a puppet, right, a puppet figure to represent your ideas. In this case, that of Kenneth Marshall, who's the villain, uh, you're not going to develop those themes very well. And so you might have this message, but if you're not going to develop the ideas behind that message, I can't even give your theme justice or fully discuss it other than what I've already done, because you haven't fully given it the nuanced view that it deserves. Versus, for example, what's the book? This is always the one that comes to mind for me, but Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. That's what it is. Yeah.
Okay.
So in Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, you have a very strong villain who has very counter themes that he is developing against the protagonist of the story. If you want to fully discuss an idea, fully develop it, fully explore the nuances of it, and then make the strong claim you're trying to make, like they are in this film, you need to make the antagonist to your hero someone who embodies the counter very strongly. And because it was such a stock character, you didn't get that with Kenneth Marshall, the villain. That being said, once again, it's a comedy. Does that mean it's a Trojan horse in disguise, or does that mean that they were just trying to make a funny film? I don't know. I don't really care. At the end of the day, that's what we got. So, if you want to push back on that, Andrew, feel free, but those are my thoughts.
I think they kind of, in a way, undermine their own theme of anti-religion, because think about the implications, right? And I think this is one where they kind of begin to explore it, but the character, and this is I think where I'm going to start talking about Mickey 17 and 18.
Mm-hmm.
The characters of Mickey 17 and 18 begin to undermine this idea of religion being purely a facade. What do I mean by this? An anti-religion message implies, right, there is no God. If there is no God, then there is no life after death. There is no true point to being man, rather other than just self gratification, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think that the girl, I forget her name,
Kia, the car, or Nasha.
Nasha's character. I think Nasha's character fulfills the idea of anti-religion much better than Mickey does, and
And
that
for
the
the
second she,
audience, who Nasha is this love interest that Mickey develops very early on in the space as they explore space. They become romantically involved with each other, and things progress from there. She ends up becoming a leader of the group after Kenneth Marshall is deposed. Well, actually, he dies, and Yilfa, his wife, is put in prison. During that coup, she becomes a new leader for the space program that is on Niflheim. But anyways,
yeah,
keep going.
I think Nasha's character does justice to the anti-religion message much better than Mickey does. You see this when she first finds out that there are two Mickeys, and her immediate thought is, "Oh boy, threesome." Um,
Right.
and so she's just very much about the carnal pleasures of physical being. Like that's where
Hmm.
her mind goes.
Hmm.
Mickey's character this entire movie is searching for some higher purpose in his life. And he posits this multiple times in the film when he's questioning, like, what am I even doing? I just keep dying and coming back, and it's going to last forever. What is the
Hmm.
purpose of my life? And he has this sense of purposelessness that needs to be fulfilled. And he finally comes to the point when he meets Mickey 18 where he tells him, he says, up until this point, I die and I come back. But if I
Hmm.
die, that's it for me because there's
Right.
you. You're
Hmm.
not me. And he didn't
Hmm.
realize that before because there had never been an instance where he got to interact with another iteration of himself.
Correct.
Which, when we get to Mickey 18, I can talk about how, they're not really the same person, and I'm sure you will too. But what's interesting to me is that at this point, Mickey truly begins to fear death, right? Now, there are two reasons you could fear death, right? In an anti-religious standpoint, you fear death because there is absolutely nothing after that, right?
Hmm.
Mickey doesn't necessarily fear death. At least I don't get the impression that he doesn't that he fears death simply because there's nothing else. He fears death because his life has meant nothing up to this point. And he like talks about how, oh, I provided this vaccine to humanity. But by the end of the movie, it's as if Mickey 18 has helped him to find value in his own life outside of purely the physical interactions he can have with this love interest, right?
Hmm.
He is working to better humanity. Whereas a truly anti religious message would be life is meaningless. Mickey 17, bro, is just meant to die to better off the quality of life of everyone else, right? Um, I'm trying to remember the philosophical idea for this. Is it utilitarianism, where it's like the good for?
Greatest
I'm
number of good
forgetting.
for the greatest number of people.
Yes, that's what
Yeah.
I'm thinking of. Um, and even the destruction, like you talked about, the destruction of the printer, again, goes back to the idea that there is value in human life, and we can't just duplicate it, right? Um,
Right.
So I don't know that they completely undermine it. I just think that Mickey's character as an extension of the anti-religious message is not the strongest one. I don't think either Mickey is. I think they're probably the strongest argument against it. And I think probably the strongest arguments for it are going to be Kenneth Marshall and Nasha in this movie.
Sure. So to push back, um, I think the idea that you're presenting is presuming that value in life only comes because of religious ideas, right? And this movie is trying to posit the argument that you can value life and value existence without having a religious background. That basically value in life can be found apart from that, and that you can value life regardless of if you have a belief in God. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. And I'm not saying necessarily that that isn't what they were going for.
Hmm.
I just disagree with the premise, and I don't think they do a good job of presenting that. Their whole idea is that life is meaningless because religion doesn't exist. and then they don't fully explore the idea of where do you find meaning in life absent religion, but you still want to find meaning in that life. And you get very, very little of that at the very end of the film. And I think that's because it is meant to be a comedy and they're not truly exploring these themes to the extent that they could be in like a more dramatized film.
Sure. Yeah. And that is perhaps maybe one of the biggest critiques you might get from this podcast is like, okay, you guys are overanalyzing a comedy, but at the same time, it's so strong. I feel like you can't help but look at the themes of this film. So, I mean, that's why we're having this discussion today.
I'm also going to say one of my other big problems with this movie is that it's meant to be a dark comedy, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it does a very good job at being a comedy.
I would agree with that. Yeah. It
I do
actually
not.
follows a natural like story arc more
Yeah,
so than I expected.
which is another thing. I was pretty surprised too, and I'm taking the 9 points going, it actually fills most of these holes here, right?
Mm-hmm.
You get a lot of these pieces all in place, but it's like they're trying to do so much in this movie. They're trying to have these very strong themes and messages. They're trying to have a comedic element to it. But because of the
Mm-hmm.
comedy, the villain gets lost in the sauce, which means now you don't have a proper foil to the protagonist who's meant to be representing one side of this almost thematic debate, if you will, of anti-religion versus religion, or
Mm-hmm.
pro-capitalism versus anti-capitalism. And then you
Mm-hmm.
also have these moments where there's like, you have dramatized scenes too. And so it's like you're kind of switching all between the three, and it's not done in a very fluid way. And there were a lot of portions where it was like, I feel like this is supposed to be funny, but it's just not. Now, granted, there were some jokes. I think there were some decent jokes in there. I think the problem with those jokes is that this is a comedy for intellectuals, not for your everyday man. If you are an intellectual individual and you enjoy philosophy and you enjoy religious texts and you enjoy political going ons and watching the
Mm-hmm.
news, then you'll probably get most of the jokes and you'll probably have some pretty decent laughs. But that's not going to be your average viewer. Like when I went to see it with Preston, I think there were a total of about 12 people in that theater. Um, Most people are not going to find this movie funny in the slightest. They are going to be completely lost. And what they're going to get out of it is cloning. Mickey 17 is retarded, and Mickey 18 is a psychopath.
100%. I would agree with that for sure. Going to back to the idea that you were talking about in regards to the ideas of the religious argument. I just want to push back a little bit. I don't want to get too caught up in this because we have been discussing the ideas around the religion theme a lot.
Sure.
I would just disagree with the idea that the premise they're going for with the religious argument is that life is meaningless without, or like life is meaningless because of religion isn't real. Basically, I think the argument that they're going for is that religion is an opiate for the masses, and that you can find meaning outside of that.
So let me clarify, by the way. I
Mm-hmm.
don't think I think you're right about the message they're going for. But earlier
Mm-hmm.
on, remember I said when you're talking about the themes of a movie, especially in a movie that has this heavy of themes within it,
Mm-hmm.
you need to ask yourself how are those messages being terminated, right?
Mm-hmm.
Me and you can dissect a movie and think about, okay, how are these themes playing out? The average man is not going to sit there and think this through as much. And
Mm-hmm.
so when you're asking yourself, because in a theme, in a movie, the
Mm-hmm.
director, the screenwriters, all of them are presenting an argument to you. What that argument
Mm-hmm.
is, it varies. In this movie, I think you're right about what the argument is. My problem is the delivery of that argument,
Okay.
if that makes sense.
I think so. Yeah. I don't want to get too caught up in it. I think that the delivery of most of these arguments was poor simply because of the main
Yeah.
antagonist, as we discussed. So,
Hmm.
I see somewhat where you're coming from with that. I'm just trying to give them a fair shake on in regards to what they're trying to convey, right? I want to make sure that as much as I might dislike parts of the movie, I'm not misrepresenting it because I don't like it. Like it actually
Yeah.
needs to be carefully analyzed and critiqued, just like they should have done with the themes they showed in this film themselves. So,
Yeah.
anyways, strong
I do
man
want to
the
also
argument.
clarify, I'm not necessarily disagreeing just because I don't like some of the themes. It's just, I don't think they are presented as well as they should have been.
Sure. What were your thoughts on the existence of the two Mickeys, right? When you first have them come into contact, you have Mickey 17 and Mickey 18. What were your thoughts on these two people who are clearly the same person, but at the same time they have diverging focuses?
I will be honest, Mickey 18, the existence of Mickey 18, not his character, the existence
Mm-hmm.
of him frustrated me. The reason why is I get the idea that, right, if you have an exact copy of someone, right? Let's say you have two twins, right? They are biologically identical individuals, okay? As they grow and mature, they will develop their own personalities, their own personas. They may get scars on certain portions of their body. They are
Mm-hmm.
not going to be the same person. At birth, they will look exactly the same. Now, this takes this to another extent because even identical twins will have varying characteristics at birth, even if they look identical.
Mm-hmm.
This movie takes it to a further extent where he is literally an exact duplicate, has the same memories, the same imprints, the same upbringing, all of it.
Mm-hmm.
And they make an exact copy of him. Yet this exact copy of him is somehow much more competent, much more confident, much more calm, calculated, cold, articulate. He doesn't have the stutter or the slur in his voice. Like, he is just so distinct from Mickey 17, and I don't know how he got there.
Sure. Okay. I mean, if that's your main critique,
That's
uh,
not my main critique. That's just the
okay.
starting point.
Okay.
I just probably of all the things in the movie bothered me the most.
That's
I was
ironic.
just
That's funny.
I was just sitting there going, I don't know how this works, right?
Mm-hmm.
If it had been a week difference or even a few months, I'd be like, okay, yeah, you know what? Makes sense. He's been through
Mm-hmm.
more stuff now.
Oh yeah, I mean, I just assumed it was a mental fissure of some kind in the brain when they uploaded things that like it had a slight neural pathway that optimized for a specific tendency, right? I'm just like giving them
Sure.
some benefit of a doubt here. I didn't think it was worth being caught up in
I was
how
hoping it was going
exactly
to
they did that.
terminate in something else, like they were slightly tweaking Mickey's psyche to make him into the ideal expendable or something, but it just
Mm.
turned out he was different. That said, uh, Mickey 18 is the GOAT, bro. Mickey 18 is legendary. All right?
I was not
This
expecting that.
man, awesome. So based. This man just taking names, bro. Mickey 17, what an absolute. I can't even say what he is. He is a coward. Um, I
Uh,
think Mickey. I was
I
hoping you would say something.
I don't. I feel like you're like I'm not even sure what train you're on at this point. I was like we were all philosophical for like a solid 45 minutes, and then you just went, "Oh, so based, so cool, it was awesome." I'm like, this is not podcast content, Andrew.
uh,
uh,
Mickey 18 is a man's man.
okay. Is that all
I
you're
was
gonna say? I'm gonna diverge at this point unless you have like I don't
See,
know what you're
okay.
going for.
I want you to start this one, all right? I always go first. I want to hear
Okay,
your
well, why
thoughts
didn't
so
you
I
say
can
that from the
push back.
beginning? No,
Well, because I
so
wanted to see what you said about my thoughts on Mickey 18 being based.
you were just trying to needle me. I see. Okay, so here's the thing. I think that this is probably one of the stronger, in my opinion, one of the stronger themes of this film is I think that this is in a unique way exploring the idea of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. In that you have the one aspect of Mickey 17, which is the very positive, caring, fun-loving, less secure individual, and then you have the other one who's a lot more dark and brooding and aggressive in everything that he does, right? And so you see they're both very skilled at taking on different aspects of the challenges that they have in front of them. One of them wants to go around and kill his enemies. The other one's like, let's all be friends and take care of the aliens in this world and not get killed by them and all of this stuff, right? So I think that they were trying to take something that is like an old idea, right? This idea of what if you could split the personality of mankind and have one aspect fully embodied in one part of you and the other aspect fully embodied in the other, and then just physically separated it into two separate individuals. Now, what you see is that in this film, they make the argument that even the Dr. Jekyll or the Mr. Hyde aspect of it, right, the negative aspect, has redeeming qualities in that he can still serve mankind in his own way. And in the way he does is he makes the great sacrifice by killing Kenneth Marshall, stopping the aliens from killing everyone who's on the spaceship at the end of the film by blowing himself up on the bomb right next to Kenneth Marshall, the villain. So in the film, I think they make the argument that there is value in both aspects of it, and it's just not, as long as you don't take it, I guess, too far, which is a little ubiquitous because, once again, maybe not fully explored, but you get that. And then you get the other aspect with the fun-loving, or not fun-loving, but like less secure, more peaceable nature of Mickey 17, where he wants to make sure that there's peace between the two species and tries to negotiate with the aliens to make sure that they don't kill the people on the spaceship. And what you get from there is the demand for the sacrifice, right? And this idea of, okay, you need to kill someone of yours since you killed one of ours is the idea that we get in the film. So that was one of the things that really stuck out to me in this film. I thought that it was an interesting idea to explore, and it was explored overall fairly cohesively, for all things being said.
I mean, I don't have much to add there. I feel like most of like what we've talked about in terms of themes covers a lot of what Mickey 17 and 18 do cover.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious if you have any thoughts on Kia.
So, sure. So the only thing I will say about Kia is this character who is basically a soldier on the ship, right? She's helping to protect people and whatnot, and she has this love interest, a girl who ends up dying early on in the story, and she's all broken up about it, blah, blah, blah. Apparently, she has interest in Mickey 17, and when she finds out that there's a duplicate, right, she's like, well, I want one. And then she's basically like, you get Mickey 17, and Nasha, you get Mickey 18, which just basically dehumanizes Mickey into a meat bag to be used however people want. To fulfill people's carnal desires, right? Kind of going back to what we saw with Nasha, where she has a sexual drive that drives her to generally averse proclivities, right? You see the same kind of thing explored further. It's supposed to be funny, right? Once again. But it's also one of those things where you go, okay, this is dehumanizing in a completely different aspect of it. So that's the only thing I really think she adds to the film, is this idea of having multiple of someone makes you see them as someone that you're not, and it just further explores that point that it makes you seem like they're nothing rather than being an actual human being, and that's something that Mickey's fighting for the entire film. Is like, no, I am a human being. I am real in my own right and deserve to be treated as such. So it was fine in regards to that small aspect. I think it's worthy of having a discussion around what is like humanity, and so it furthered that, but I don't think she's a great character. I didn't enjoy her really on screen.
Okay, I was just wondering because I think she serves some purpose, but I wonder more what you think about side characters in general in this movie. So,
Are you thinking of other ones in particular, like Timo or something?
oh yes, you mean Invincible?
Sure.
I mean, I think Timo's just meant to represent, again, the capitalist critique, right? that
Mm-hmm.
even your friends now become commodities that are meant to be disposed of. And he also views Mickey as completely expendable, as his
Mm-hmm.
name suggests. Um, so,
Mm-hmm.
uh, me personally, I'd have taken Kia over Nasha any day, bro.
I knew you were driving toward that. That is the only reason you made that argument earlier, and I knew it. You're so dumb, bro. What on earth? Okay, we're
What
moving on.
argument? What argument are you
You
referring
you
to?
were like, "Oh, what do you think of Kia?" I'm just
Yeah.
curious. Yeah, I knew exactly why you were saying that, you idiot.
Okay. I I wanted to try also asking you questions because I feel like you're always the one asking me questions, but
The last theme I really want to discuss is the idea surrounding the aliens and how you have these characters known as the creepers, which is this new alien species, basically a armadillo with dune type worm faces who runs around and tries to say, "Don't take over our snow planet. This is Niflheim is ours. How dare you?" Why are we colonizing their planet? How could we do that? That's so bad.
I mean, I'm just going to go back to the capitalist critique. It's just a critique of capitalism. It's the idea that we're commodifying everything, and everything is meant to be exploited for the betterment of the individual, um, specifically humans. And so it's this view that humanity is a net negative on the rest of the world, and that the right, there's so many things that are an outflowing of this idea of the capitalist critique and the anti-religion message here, and this is just another one of them, right? The idea that we as a species, if you will, take everything and use it as we see fit, which, I mean, to be completely honest with you, yeah, humans are based, bro. We rule. Okay.
So you're saying screw the aliens. If we go to another planet, this place is mine now.
I personally don't believe aliens exist, but okay, let me clarify. I don't believe intelligent life exists outside of humanity, outside of planet Earth. I think there are other types of alien life, if you will, that could exist. I don't think intelligent life exists outside of humanity. That said, the idea of colonialism, right? They were here first. The best example you have of that, Native Americans, colonial America, right? They're saying, look at this, capitalism, bad. What I do think is interesting, by the way, as a side note, the implication is that the entire planet has gone to crap, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
If this is true, it can't truly be a critique of capitalism, as capitalism is not the form of government or the way all economies function on Earth. It is the way that, say, the United States functions. But China is very much not a capitalistic society, and they contribute so much more to the destruction of the atmosphere and the planet. So that's just a side note. But what I think is interesting is that this movie assumes that the United States represents all of Earth. Um,
Sure.
so that was just a side note. Me nitpicking here.
Yeah, I mean, there's like not enough time to fully discuss that. I wouldn't even throw
Yeah,
that at them just because it's like
I just feel like the
that's not the point of this
colonialism.
film at all.
I feel like the colonialism was just. It was like the cherry on top of the sundae that was already too much for a movie. Like it's a comedy, so it's already not following the general rules of a movie, but you're already going for this anti-religion theme, and you have all of these outflowings of that, right? And I think that the colonialism theme, it should have just been an outflowing of that, but I think it should have probably have been brought up sooner. Um, than just like the very end of the movie. So
Sure. I mean, yeah, it's
That that
not it's
I
not a
don't
big part
necessarily have
of
a
yeah.
major yeah, I don't it's not a big part of it. I don't have a major problem with it. But again, like the more we go into this, the more I am like trying to reaffirm the reason why I bring up this capitalist critique, right?
Sure. And you can definitely see it more as you discuss it. I still wouldn't maybe put it as far as you do, but I see definitely there are strong themes there, and I can't disagree that they exist and are prevalent in the film. In regards to the aliens themselves, this actually goes back to the very first podcast we ever did on a lost plot, and that was for Arrival, which is a 2016 film about aliens arriving on Earth and being able to communicate with them and understanding them from that standpoint, right? So that if you're curious about our thoughts on that, go ahead and go way back to the very beginning to hear what we had to say. But you get a little bit of that explored with an extra addendum in this one about trying to cohabitate with these creatures that are completely different from us, right? And understanding at the end of the day that you can interact with them and treat them as real creatures who have emotions and feeling and all of that stuff, rather than simply having your gut reaction be, let's exterminate them all, right? So it's an interesting idea. It's kind of very much a hypothetical because as of yet we have never interacted with aliens, so we don't know what we would do, right? But the idea they're trying to present is hopefully we would treat them in a kind fashion, right? And try to work with them rather than work against them and just massacre them. And that does tie a little bit to the colonialism argument that you were just making about, like, what do we do when we interact with people that we have never seen before who are very different culturally than us? So that's all there is to say on that point. And yeah, that's all I have to say. What are your thoughts on the film overall? What are your initial impressions? I don't know that changing the rating necessarily matters so much. So, do you think this is going to be a lasting impact film? What are your thoughts?
I will say, I think it was marketed well. Um, I don't know that it's going to have that big of a lasting impact, being that it's such a philosophical film.
Mm-hmm.
I think it'll be probably one of those niche films, rather, that certain people know about, certain people enjoy watching. Um, I don't think it's really going to change much in the grand scheme of things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's definitely not a film I would recommend to most people. Um, like, you have to be someone who thinks very critically about what you watch to be someone who can actually enjoy this movie on any level.
Right. And
Um,
that's even beyond just whether or not you agree with the messages or not. It's
yeah,
just to
yeah,
get the
yeah.
jokes that they're making in this film
Well,
or
yeah.
to appreciate it from a
Yeah,
viewing standpoint.
to even make it worthy of the name comedy, you have to have the ability to think critically and have a decent amount of understanding of philosophy and religion and politics. And so there's a very select crowd that can enjoy this movie. And even the crowd that can enjoy it may not enjoy it because of the messages that are being presented. So that even narrows it down even more. So when I'm thinking of good movies, right, I'm not going to use this using the rate this using the 9 point system. A good movie to me is a movie that I would recommend to most people and most people could enjoy. Um, that said, even if this was an excellently done dark comedy that really explored these themes, it'd probably get like a 7. I'm probably giving this like a 5.5 or a 6 at best. Because it
Mm-hmm.
does have some very strong themes and they do a decent job of exploring them. There's just a lot going on here and they're trying to do a bunch all at once. So
Right. Right.
it ends up getting lost.
Right. And I would definitely echo that. Don't I wouldn't say I wish I didn't watch the film because I definitely appreciated the stab they were trying to make, even though I disagreed with so much of the conclusions they came to, right?
Yeah.
It was an interesting thought exploration. I want to see more films like this, right? Films that explore ideas that are out there and terminate them to their full extent, right? The idea that you could come face to face with another version of yourself when one of you should be dead is an intriguing premise. I think it's worthy to explore that idea. I would not say I would recommend this film to most people. And it's interesting. I do think that the marketing was done well, echoing what you said. There was multiple people immediately after watching this film that I told them, "Oh, I just watched this," and they would go, "Oh my goodness, how was it?" And they were really excited because they were curious to hear what was this film about. The
Yeah.
advertising was done very well. Uh, can't recommend it, but
Yeah.
that's it. That's the pod. We hope you all enjoyed because we will be back as we always are next week. We'll see you all then.